Now, look, I know I'm quite critical of those runaway royals, Harry and Meghan, but a bombshell new book has revealed that even the late Queen Elizabeth II was on my side, with Her Majesty reportedly branding their behaviour as quite mad. Robert Jobson's Our King exposes the late Queen's bewilderment at the Sussexes' attack on the family, with sources also revealing that palace discussions about stripping them of their titles were held at the highest levels until loving Father Charles relented. Well, joining me now is the Daily Telegraph's star columnist Celia Walden. So, Celia, with this couple refusing to even reveal whether they're going to bother to turn up to the coronation or not, surely the Queen was right. Their behaviour is quite mad. They're mad, aren't they?
Well, I mean, it's a characteristic understatement, isn't it, really, of the Queen? And it is obviously quite mad, as well as being incredibly narcissistic, downright rude. And you could actually add inhumane to that list, I think, given some of the headlines that we're seeing coming out of before the publication of Robert Jobson's book. Because we've got new light being shed, for example, on the actual day that the late Queen died, haven't we? And I know that there were rumours. I don't know how much the wider public heard at the time, but I remember certainly as a journalist, and I'm sure you do too, that the very day after, people were saying, oh well, the plane had to be held up because there was infighting about whether Meghan could come and be there, and Harry was insisting that she be there, and this had held everything up. And as it was, of course, he only was able to get to Balmoral by, I think, 8 o'clock or so, and had actually missed his dear grandmother. But
because sorry, I just want to dig down a little bit on that, because my reading of this, but tell me if I'm wrong, but my reading of this is that Harry missed out on actually being at the Queen's deathbed because he was told his master Meghan wasn't allowed to be there too. That's despite the fact that only Camilla and Sophie had been allowed to join, not Kate, not any of the other royal women, because of their personal closeness to the late Queen. So that shows what a destructive force Meghan is, doesn't it, to this family?
Well, if this is all correct, and, you know, we know that Robert Jobson is a very, very sort of well-respected, a veteran royal reporter, so he is the one who would know. But again, as I say, we all heard this story very soon after, and the idea that this actually happened and that you would have the presumption to you know, sort of get in the way at such an incredibly sort of vulnerable and important time is just extraordinary. It shows to me how far gone they both are in terms of knowing what their priorities are.
And don't you think, Celia, that this just was Meghan wanting to insert herself at a historic event, and the family, quite rightly, thank God, said she's not going to be anywhere near this, even if it means holding up the plane, even if it means the whole family are going to be late, which they were in the end. Meghan is not going to be anywhere near this moment in history, because it's sacrosanct, really, the death of the late Queen, and she couldn't be trusted because she would have talked about it.
100%. And, you know, you have to remember that with her, whether it's the coronation or with anything, you know, her relevance and the rest of her life, essentially, on the kind of talk show circuit depends on her having been at key events. So, again, if we go to the coronation, it's now less than a month, isn't it? We still don't know whether they're coming or not, which, you know, would be downright rude if it were just me and you having a dinner party, wouldn't it, Dan? You would expect someone... You know, is it a yes or a no? I don't care, but just tell me a yes or a no. So part of me wishes that Charles at this point would say, do you know what? I'm taking the invitations back. You actually can't come now. We're giving them to someone else who's got a little bit more decorum. But I know he won't, because for the same reason that he hasn't withdrawn their titles, I think he hopes that there will be a reconciliation, you know, and who can blame any father for wanting that?
I guess so, but I'm with you, Celia. I think he should just rip the invitations up. What's really interesting about this book, actually, is that Robert Jobson, who you referred to, he was a regular on this show for a very long time. You know, he is the royal journalist who has always been closest to King Charles. So he's very, very tapped into the way that King Charles thinks and his inner circle. And what was fascinating to me, Celia, is that it was discussed right at the highest levels at the royal families. That means right up to the level of the late Queen, about whether the Sussexes should lose their title, you know, whether they shouldn't be called the Duke and the Duchess of Sussex anymore. But it was Charles who came in and overruled that decision. Because I think you're right. I think as a dad, he always wants this reconciliation. But do you also think that maybe, Celia, he is becoming a little bit deluded? Like, there's nothing that the Sussexes that have done, right, in the past 2 years that gives any indication that they ever want a reconciliation. Actually, quite the opposite. They're trying to destroy the royal family. So isn't it time for Charles to just get a little bit tougher?
Well, I mean, there's that side of it, but then you sometimes wonder whether it's actually them being very shrewd in terms of, you know, how would the rest of the world really perceive the palace and the royals if they did take away their titles completely? I wonder if it would actually be playing right into Harry and Meghan's hands, because then you really are, you know, any violin, however small, that they can play on is just manna from heaven for them, isn't it? This is what they need. But if you're so it is quite clever to have taken away, you know, obviously the royal but they've kept the Duke and Duchess titles. So but I think it does give them a sort of if you took away all the titles, not only would we be playing in the weeds with I'm talking about us, it's sort of the country, the palace, we would be down on their level, wouldn't we, really? Because you'd be going, fine, well, in that case,
I guess they'd become martyrs. Yeah, they would become martyrs, and Meghan would always be able to say, they did it because I'm mixed race, even though it had absolutely nothing to do with that. But the thing I love most about this book, just going back to the top, I just love the fact that, because, you know, Harry and Meghan always wanted to act. They always tried to pretend that the Queen adored them. You know, and all of their criticism of the royal family was nothing to do with the Queen. Well, I'm sorry, Harry and Meghan, she thought you were mad. She actually shared the view of the vast majority of the British public. She thought you had gone mad.
And, you know, bear in mind, the Queen was a very intelligent woman. She would have taken, she would have seen hundreds of Meghans in her life. Imagine how many Meghans she's seen. You know, she would have taken one look at her and seen, you know, summed up her behaviour and thought, OK, I know exactly what your game is. But of course, she was also a very graceful woman. And I think she went as far as she could. But she wasn't alive, thank goodness, to witness, you know, the latest sort of chapter, was she? So I wonder what she would do if she were here now.